Hey folks, Nick here from another BookTube channel. Today, reacting to your unpopular opinions. I put up a post on my community page asking for your unpopular book or comic book opinions, and I'm going to share them here and react to them. So I got a lot of good responses. Thank you to everyone that left a comment on either the community page or on the video that I had posted asking for some suggestions. If you guys enjoy this, hopefully I'll do another one in the future with an even bigger group and even more. So let's go ahead and we'll get started with the first one here from Cliff's Dark Gems. Hey Cliff, how are you doing? Cliff's got a really nice channel if you guys aren't already subscribed to him. The Haunting of Hill House, beloved by so many as a horror classic, was a letdown for me. To be fair, her novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, was stunning, so I will give her another chance. That, yeah, I would say that is an unpopular opinion because of that book having the status of a classic. But I think, like any classic, it does not have any shortage of people who are disappointed by it. And I think Haunting of Hill House in particular, there is an issue where, like, what is entered into the public consciousness has tainted a lot of people's expectations for it. Because a lot of people just know about it from, like, there's been several movie adaptations. There was a Netflix adaptation, which was excellent, but had basically nothing to do with the original novel. And it creates this expectation in your head of, like, okay, there's going to be a big spooky house. There's going to be a lot of crazy things that happen in it. It's going to be terrifying. And that's not what it is at all. And I don't think that it's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be what you're expecting out of it. So Haunting of Hill House, to me, works as a character piece. The main character, what's her name? Is it Eleanor, I think? It's about her and her paranoia and her trying to fit in a group where she obviously does not belong or does not fit in. And the real haunting that's going on is she's haunted by her own thoughts, her own insecurities. And the house is just a vessel. It's just a place where this is playing out. And there are some possible supernatural things going on, but the house is secondary. It's really about that main character. So I would suggest trying it again, maybe when you've got some distance from it, and look at it from that point of view. And maybe you'll like it better, maybe not. But that's just my suggestion out there for anyone who didn't care for Haunting of Hill House on the first read. But thank you for that. Gregor X. Ain says, I can't imagine that novels featuring comic book superheroes are any good, but I'm open to have my mind changed about this. I've only read a few novels based on comic book characters. I read a Fantastic Four book and a Captain America book for Garb August, and I recently read the Swamp Thing book. I just picked up a Challenges of the Unknown book, and I've got another Captain America book on the way. And some of them, they're pretty fun, depending. But I think that they definitely lose something in the transition from comic to prose because there's a reason these are comic book characters. They are visually interesting. The Fantastic Four work in a comic book because you get to see Reed Richards stretch and do crazy contortions. You get to see the flaming torch flame on. You get to look at the Thing and see his monstrous bulk and see him knock stuff down. And if you don't have a good author who's translating that to just the written word, it's not going to work. But it can. I mean, I'm sure it can. I'll keep exploring this avenue and share my findings on this channel. But I understand your hesitation there, 100%. Roy Reads Anything. Hi, Roy. He's another booktuber that I like. Dark Knight and Watchmen were great series that had an unfortunate influence on comics in general. And I did ask Roy to clarify what that influence was and what makes it unfortunate. And he specified the darkening of mainstream comics and focusing on gritty, realistic stories. Not that there's no place for those, but the fun seemed to be drained out of it. This is an interesting opinion. Because on the one hand, comics needed Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and Swamp Thing because comics weren't doing anything interesting or special before that. Superhero comics were dead in the 50s and 60s. Comic book superheroes were dead. And it took the revolutionizing of like Batman by Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil to kind of breathe new life into that character, and they did it by making him a little bit darker, because comics at that point were for children. Comics, like superhero comics, were for children only in the Silver Age, basically, pretty much. If you're talking Marvel and DC, and then here comes Alan Moore from across the pond, who brings in Miracle Man, which gets published at Marvel, who starts on Swamp Thing, who does Watchmen. We get Frank Miller, who does amazing things on Daredevil and Dark Knight. And suddenly, you've got comics that are fit for adults, like truly fit for adults, that are challenging and reaching the levels of true literature. Because that's what I view some of these books as. Like, Watchmen is one of the best books, period, I have ever read. However, to your point, I do think that Marvel and DC in particular may have taken the wrong lessons away from stories like that, like Swamp Thing, like Watchmen. And they did, and we're seeing the repercussions now still, where superheroes that were never really meant to be that dark are being shifted in that direction, and it's not really necessary. But one of the good things, I guess, about Marvel and DC is that there are so many titles that you've got a lot of tones to choose from, and Batman has never come back. Like, Batman went dark and has never ever come back. Superman, he's got a lot of like really fun stories since then, and you get a good mix. I mean, you do. It's not like a bleak landscape in comics. There's so many options out there. But there are definitely instances where you see the wrong lessons were taken away from those books. Thank you, Roy, for the comment. Here's a general, just like book collector one from Alicia. She says, I'm a spine breaker. I don't mind my books looking like I've read them, because I have. Dog ear, highlight, write notes, doesn't bother me. That's good tea. Well, Alicia, it bothers me. I don't like that, and that's an unpopular opinion to me. I especially dog earing. I hate dog-eared pages. We have bookmarks. Use a bookmark. You can use anything as a bookmark too. It doesn't even need to be a real bookmark. Use another piece of paper. Use anything. Use a leaf. There's no need to hurt your pages like that. And I say that, and being like someone who's not super precious about my books. Like, if it's a special edition, I spent a little bit extra on it. If it's a higher price point, then don't touch that book. Leave the dust jacket on. Like, try not to handle it too much. But if it's like a mass market paperback, I'll buy a used one that's dog-eared and highlighted and whatever. I don't care, but I won't do it myself. So you're the one who's doing all that stuff to the books that get cast off to thrift shops that I'm picking up for cheap. So for that, I thank you. But enjoy your mangling of books. Rick Santos. Hi, Rick. Batman v Superman, despite reactions to the movie, would have won awards had it been a comic series or graphic novel. Me and Rick go way back. Me and Rick have known each other for many years, and we've had many conversations about Batman v Superman. It is a movie that he is a fan of. It's a movie that I am not a fan of, definitively. And I think he's trying to rile me up here and grind my gears a little bit. But let me humor you. So I think what you're saying here is that if the story from Batman v Superman was taken and just put into a comic book format instead, we would be celebrating that comic book as this great thing, whereas the movie, everyone hated it, rightly. And I think that comes down to a lot of things. It comes down to like what the art's going to look like. It comes down to what dialogue gets cut in the transition, how the editing gets adjusted in the transition. Because if you take Zack Snyder out, if you take Zack Snyder's visual style, take Zack Snyder's directing, take Zack Snyder's editing out of the equation, you will have something better, because Zack Snyder stinks. He's one of the worst directors that has found success today or ever, possibly, in my opinion. I think he's awful. So you will probably have a better product. I don't know if the story as is would be, but you'd have a better shot for sure. If someone who knew better about story editing got a hand on it, they could fix it for sure. Next up, Tom Orange. Tom is another booktuber that I'm really enjoying his channel recently. The Lord of the Rings books are good, but not the best fantasy ever. I think a lot of people really love the movies and give all that love to the books at the same time. This is a very unpopular opinion, I would say, with the Tolkien fanatics, the ones who memorize the Silmarillion and all that stuff. They will, I'm sure, be at your door any moment to tell you how wrong you are. But here's the thing, Tom. I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with the first half of your opinion here, that the books are good, but not the best fantasy ever. I agree with that. I think that I respect Tolkien completely. I mean, he's a genius. He created entire languages to fit his world. Very well thought out fantasy world. Just like everything is in its place. As far as a reading experience, though, I found the books to be very boring. And in fact, I never finished it. I never read Return of the King. I gave up after Two Towers because I was really bored by them. I did not jive with his writing style at all. I think it was a little too plain and over-explanatory for me. Like I didn't get anything. I don't know. I didn't find it all that impressive. The world is impressive, but the writing to me was not. Now, about your second point of people really love the movies, and so they give the books the love at the same time. Maybe, but I do know that a lot of Tolkien fans actually weren't huge fans of the movies because you can't please them. Just like you're not going to please Wheel of Time fans with the Wheel of Time adaptation, although that has a lot of its own problems. So I don't know so much about that part. I think there is a separation there. Like, I like the Lord of the Rings movies. I like the extended editions a lot. I think they're fantastic, but I don't let that affect my opinion of the books. But that could just be me. But thank you for the unpopular opinion, Tom. Cha5 says, I wish there was less emphasis on comic book movies and more on promoting comics and sequential art as a medium and supporting your local brick and mortar comic shops. I don't even know if this is an unpopular opinion. I think anyone that loves comics would agree with that, honestly. I think in the general public, though, is what maybe you're talking about, that people would stop being hung up on like what's next for the MCU and instead go to a comic book shop and just see what's currently happening in the Marvel universe, like proper. And I could get on board with that. I think comic book movies have their place. If they do their job right, they drive new readers to those brick and mortar shops. That's what happened to me. It took a while, but I eventually did start reading comics because of those movies. Well, for a few reasons. But so they've got their place, but I 100% agree. And I think, to expand on your point, I don't like how Marvel and DC will change the comics to more reflect the movies that they make. Because that, to me, is like a complete lack of integrity. Like, stick to your guns, hire real creators who are trying to tell real stories. Don't just cater to like what's currently working like on screen. Like, make the comics good. Don't worry about looking like the movies. So that's that. Jacob Brown says, digital coloring and drawing is the worst thing that happened to comic books. This is interesting. The worst thing to happen to comic books. I don't know about that. That does strike me as unpopular. So, okay, digital recoloring, I will agree with you. And I think you even mentioned, you put a second response here. Yeah, where you talk about the recolored Swamp Thing run, which I think I've mentioned on this channel before. But what Marvel or DC will do when they issue like special edition reprints of classic comics, they will recolor them digitally. And I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. I hate that so much because those original colors were selected for a reason. It's because it's what worked. It's what would fit the atmosphere. It's what fit the mood. And you talk about the Swamp Thing run specifically. I have the absolute Swamp Thing, the first two of them, and I hate them. I want to get rid of them, but I spent so much money on them. I can't. I have I can't bring myself to do it because Steve Oliff, who did the recoloring, basically spit on the pages. He ruined the pages by overriding what Tatiana Wood originally put down there. And when it's completely different than just like the switch from newsprint to glossy paper, because if you look at a lot of regular edition reprints, but back then in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, comics were on newsprint, so they absorbed the color differently than glossy paper does. Glossy paper is what we use today. And so when you print on glossy paper an older comic with the original colors, it'll be more saturated, it'll be more colorful because the paper doesn't absorb the color the same way. So it's not as dark, it's a lot brighter, a lot poppier. I'm okay with that. You lose the fidelity a little bit, but you're at least trying. But to completely digitally recolor and like change people's minds, like that will change your mind, or just decide that the original colors were wrong. Hate that. Hate that, hate that, hate that, hate that, hate that. But like digital coloring in general, like if you know how to use it, I think in the 90s it was a problem. You had a lot of too many like browns and like muddy stuff like that. But today I think we're over that. In the 90s, colorists got the crayon box was fully opened. They got digital coloring, so they didn't know when to say when. I think now, for the most part, people know when to say when. And as for digital drawing, I don't really have a problem with it. I would love to hear if you have a specific example why, but I feel like digital drawing is just kind of commonplace now. I know that some artists will do practical and then do digital touch-ups. They might do fully digital. I like to have a practical drawing to look at, honestly. I like to see original art, and it's not quite the same on a screen, but I don't know that it's a huge problem for me. But thank you for sharing the opinion, Jacob. The Bloody Library says Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is way better than Stephen King's novel. King tries so hard to make us like Jack, even though he says heinous things about his family. Kubrick saw through all that and made Jack entirely what he was, an asshole. Yeah, I would say this is unpopular. Even though, look, I love both. I don't think you have to say one is better than the other, because to me they are so different that comparing them is almost pointless, because they share a name, they share character names, they share a location, and that's like basically where the similarities end. And I love Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's what started me on like my journey of film study. It's like literally it was the movie that made me realize that movies were art. But I also, Stephen King was the author that made me realize reading was fun. So his novel is fantastic, but it's doing something completely different than the movie is, or vice versa, because the movie was later, obviously. So they're trying to accomplish different things, and I think they both accomplish those things really, really well. So that's what I'll say on that. Shiny Rap says, we need to start shaming these never-ending book series. I'm completely over 38-book-long series or trilogy with 14 novellas. Go find another character and play in the same world, but I'm done with the never-ending series thing. I will allow there are always going to be exceptions, but it's completely out of hand. I can see how that's frustrating. I'm not involved in any series like that. The longest series I've ever read is Wheel of Time, and that's done, fortunately. I think of something maybe like Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, where the series isn't done and George R. R. Martin keeps putting out more novellas and like short stories in the same world, and everyone's like, George, stop, come on, Winds of Winter. But yeah, I would agree. If I see a book series is crazy long and no end in sight, I'm not interested. Like the Cosmere has an end in sight. It's just that he's got to write them. He's working on it. So I totally get that. Hey Ho 12 says, I don't own and never will buy or sell any graded comic book. I think comic books should be read no matter how special the book is. And if it's locked inside a plastic case, it's just useless. Not only the book is sealed, never to be flipped through, it's also expensive as F. I call scam. I call scam. Save your special comics in a bag and board, far from any sunlight and dust, and your comic will be worth something. I completely get this. And I used to be a key comic hunter. I used to try to find any comic I could, if it was, somewhat valuable, send it off to CGC and, try to get the highest grade. I don't do that anymore. I haven't sent a comic to be graded in a while, and I never will again. CGC damaged one of my books, and I'm not going to go into the full story here. If you want to hear that, I'm happy to do another video on it. They damaged one of my books, so I'm done with CGC forever. And I was already on the outs with them because the grading's too inconsistent. Comic book grading is, I agree with you, a scam. 100% it's a scam. Because it's so subjective, there are no rules. Even though CGC has their little guidebook they published, it's nonsense. I've seen 9.8 books that have spine ticks all up and down them. There's no quality control, nothing. It's garbage, is a scam. I like CBCS more because I like their transparent grader notes and I like their cases, but grading in general just doesn't appeal to me. The differences between a 9.2, 9.4, 9.6, it's so stupid. It's so stupid to get caught up on that stuff. I will say for graded comics, I do have a bunch from when I was getting them graded and from books that I buy already graded, because I do think that there is something to be said for preserving a historical artifact, which is what I consider a lot of these older comics to be. Like I have a Daredevil #1 hanging on my wall right there. And it's a 1.8. It's super low grade. The cover, I think, is detached. It's brittle. Like, I'm not going to read that. Even if it was out of the case, I'm not going to flip through that book because I don't want to destroy it. It's a piece of history. And if I want to read Daredevil 1, there are reprints that exist. So I'll find a different way to read it. So from a preservation perspective, I still think grading comics has a place. I just wish that the numbers weren't involved. I wish there wasn't grading. I wish it was just preserving. That's really all that I want from that. Okay, last few here. These next two, I actually don't have a lot to say about because I haven't read the books, but I'll say them anyway, and feel free to react in the comments. Graham Atticus says he really wanted to like Catch-22. Tried to read it several times, can't get more than a third of the way along. Couldn't bring myself to laugh at what I thought were very repetitive jokes within a very repetitive message. Bureaucracy is idiotic and war is pointless. Did I miss something? Is there something more? I don't know because I haven't read it. If you've read Catch-22, respond to Atticus in the comments. Although I will say, your comment makes me want to read it because it almost sounds like something Kurt Vonnegut would write. I didn't realize Catch-22 was a comedy, which is how I didn't know Kurt Vonnegut was a funny writer before I started reading him. So maybe I would like Catch-22. I'll have to look into it. And Leslie Spear writes Babel by R.F. Kuang was a bad, boring book. Don't understand the hype. It was more a lesson in language than a fantasy read. I haven't read Babel. I've heard very mixed things, though. So I don't know if that's a super unpopular opinion because I've definitely seen mixed things. I know if you look at like Bookstagram or Book Talk, you wouldn't think that because I feel like that book blew up. But I personally have heard very mixed things about it. And I haven't read it specifically because of those mixed reactions I've heard. Choco1199 says, audiobooks are reading. And yeah, they are. I think we're at a pretty good place now where that's no longer an unpopular opinion. I think like the real reading community of people who aren't just like jerks and elitist assholes acknowledges that like, it doesn't matter how you take in the book. If you have a book and it has a bunch of words in it and those words get into your head, it doesn't really matter how they got there. Whether you read them, whether someone reads them to you, whether you read them with Braille, like it literally doesn't matter. It's just ingesting the material of the book. I think people get hung up on like the definition of reading is like using your eyes to take in words across a page. Like when we say we're reading, it's a catch-all to just say that I am experiencing a book. That's the way I look at it. And finally, Hawkfu says, if a book series doesn't get the plot rolling until book 3, you need to combine all 3 books into one. Looking at you, First Law. I've only read the first book of First Law, and I can tell you, like, I kind of agree with that, just because I feel like that book didn't do anything to grip me. Um, and I haven't read a ton of series that were that long where it takes until book 3. So my only frame of reference here is Wheel of Time, and I would argue that Wheel of Time doesn't really become the Wheel of Time until book 4, but those first 3 books are still really important to the development to get to book 4, if that makes sense. So yeah, fine, that's an unpopular one. If you have more examples you would like to cite, let me know. And if anyone wants to respond to that and say, if you have your own examples of books where they could have been combined, or books where they needed to be different books, leave those in the comments as well. But those are all of the unpopular opinions you guys left for me. Thank you again so much for participating in this. I hope that my reactions were interesting. I would love to hear your reactions as well in the comments. Thank you for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.